really.
Hey, what's up, guys?
What's up?
It's my first ever racing podcast. Thank you for coming, Brandon.
We're going to break the internet today.
Yeah, millions of views. We'll be naked. We'll be like...
Naked?
Keep watching, guys.
What kind of podcast are we doing here, man?
Crazy podcast. Crazy stuff, you know. Okay, Brandon is my first ever coach and engineer. We did the season together in Formula 4, so thank you for that. Today I just want to chat about your story and about racing overall. So if you can, we can start by introducing yourself. You can tell like a short story about you, how you get into racing, why you love racing. And
Very good. Well, I started racing at the age of 7 in karting, and since then racing has just been in my blood. Once you catch the blood, once you get the dopamine hit that comes from racing, it's really hard to get rid of. And I'm sure you're starting to you can relate to that. You're starting to feel that now. So I did karting for up until I was 18, and growing up, budget was really a big issue for me. I had a really hard time. My family had a really hard time making the budget for karting. I mean, there was even some races where I showed up with 1s and 5s and 10s from yard sales that I've done to get to the track. That was back in 2008 when things went really crazy back then. It hit my dad pretty hard, but yeah. So I struggled quite a bit to get through karting. I've won several national championships.
Oh, really? Which classes?
When I was in juniors, I won 2, and in seniors, I won 1. So this was like 15, 16.
Is it like products?
This would be Grand Nationals. So I have 3 Duffys. There's only 3 trophies I still keep actually in my house. I have hundreds of others and too much shelf space, so I threw those all away and just kept the main ones. But those were they don't run that championship anymore. It's gone extinct. Now SCUSA and there's a few other series that are big, but IKF's not quite up there. But it used to be quite the accomplishment to win.
So it was like the main US karting championship, or
yes, yeah? I mean it used to be the biggest karting championship that you could win in the US.
And you won it.
Yes,
in juniors.
Of single race besides the Supernats. So I've won that 3 times. Never got to do Supernats
because of the money,
budget stuff. Yeah, I mean to do Supernats back then, it was still at least about $10,000. Now it's gone even more to do that.
$10,000 per race
to do Supernats. Yeah, if you figure in hotel.
And Supernats is the final race.
Supernats it's one race in Vegas, and right back then it was still the biggest one race of the year. But right now it still is the largest single race in the United States. They're getting 80 carts quite easily in some of the classes. So never got to do that, primarily for budget concerns, but there plenty of other competitors that I was racing at the time, who were racing both, and I there's no doubt that I would have been easily in the top 10 going to that event.
So
but
nice.
We tried to make it, but the money just never quite made it. Back then it was at least to do a professional like national level round in karting was easily $100,000 back then. Could figure in travel $100,000 in 2008 this was when I was at my peak was about 2012 2013. But now it's everything in racing is 6 figures, as you're aware. But in the US you can still do it, minimum around $100,000, but there's still many people who are spending $250,000 in doing a season of karting.
Shifters or products or both?
Either tag karts or shifter karts.
The same, right?
Not the same, but shifters, engines, and everything. You're gonna run yourself a little bit more, but the main price is going to come from the team that you're pitting with, and then just the cost of travel is quite.
And how many races in go-kart season? Like 12 races, 16?
On a national, like for Pro Tour now is like the national level series. Pro Tour. That's a 3-race event. Well, 6 races technically. 3 events, 2 races per event. And if you're only doing those races, you're not quite going to have enough seat time and experience in that season to be at your best. So I mean, you need to be to really compete at a full season in karting and be like top level, you need to be at least minimum two times in the kart per month. That's like absolute bare minimum, and that's you're easily going to get into a $250,000 range if you're really pushing it. And those national level races, these are the top guys are getting a brand new go-kart for every event. You know, you don't have too much experience in karting, but especially when you get like all the way up to the top, the karts are softest and at the highest level of performance when they're brand new. And as the kart fatigues, every time you put it on track, there's just a little bit of a loss of performance every single time you put the car on track. So the top guys are buying a brand new go-kart for every event.
So they change the chassis for
brand new chassis for basically 3 events. So you're going to run 3 brand new chassis and then 1 new chassis for Supernats. So really 4 chassis you're going to go through in a year. A go-kart chassis is $5,000 roughly.
Yeah. So it's already like what? 20K
it's and it's having all the engine. It adds up pretty quickly.
Yeah. So it's like 20K for the chassis, or 20K for engine, something like that.
Well, 5K for the chassis. The engine. You're going to go with a fresh engine. You don't necessarily have to get a new one, but many people will just get a new one, or they'll buy 10 engines and pick the best one of the bunch, and then go run that for that race. It's just, unfortunately, as we've talked, racing is a sport that the more money you spend, often the better you do. There's a very high correlation behind dollars spent and grid position. So it's
so it's like
especially when you get to the top level, when you're searching for every tenth and you're 1/10 off, like that last tenth is worth tens of thousands of dollars. And if you have the money, you'll spend it. Brand new go-kart, keep changing engines until we get the best one on there. This is all this is all stuff I didn't have the money to do, but yet there's plenty of competitors I was competing at their level, and they've got 10 engines in the trailer and I have 1. I was able to compete with these guys, but it's really difficult to, when your budget's $60,000 to $100,000 is really all that I could get. It's hard to compete against those guys who are putting $250,000 into karting every year. But I did the best. You do the best with the cars that you're dealt, and it's not an excuse or anything. There's no benefit in making any excuses for it. You do the best with the cards that you're dealt, and where you finish is where you finish. Try your best. And luckily enough, I ended with a few trophies on the shelf. But
that's amazing that you outcompete the guys with the bigger riders, right?
Yeah, but from that point on, it's struggling with that. It only gets even more difficult and more expensive as your car starts to get bigger and faster. Quite easily. So you're racing in Formula 4 right now. A Formula 4 series in the US is about $250,000. Just what you're going to pay to run the car and purchase services from the team, entry fees, tires, all that stuff. Quite easily, it's going to be $250,000. $250,000.
This is $250,000.
$250,000, no.
Too expensive,
No, $250,000. And in the US, at least all the way up into Indy Lights, Indy Lights, you're going to get into 750 range. So you're going to be north of $1 million to do a season of Indy Lights. And everything comparison in Europe, so like Formula 4 to US and Formula 4 versus in Europe, everything in Europe is
2x?
About 2x, yeah.
So really, Formula 4 in Germany,
people will spend
ADAC or like
400, 500,000 euros is not unheard of to spend on a Formula 4 season baseline in Europe. I would, one of the biggest spenders of the last decade in the junior series was Lance Stroll, and he actually poured quite a lot of capital into Prima, and there's the Prima's still feeling quite a lot of the effects of having a billionaire supporting their team. And I don't know what he spent, but he probably spent 7 figures in the season before. I didn't see any of the bills or anything, but there were no expenses wasted, as you could see, going up for Lance Stroll's racing career. There was, is it going to cost $1 million? I'll write the check. Done. That was the experience that I could at least see, and some people from the inside have told me the outside looking in, but never got to work with this. I can't say
Formula 3
exactly what happened there, but
US, Formula 3 FIA. So Formula 3 US is like $500,000 or something like that.
Less than that. There's no Formula 3 in the US. It's
Formula
Formula Regional. It used to be called Formula 3.
Yeah.
But Formula Regional here in the US is actually quite similar cost to F4. The teams are doing quite a lot to keep the cost down. But I mean, you can expect to, if F4 is 240 here or 250 here, it's going to be $350 for a season of FR. It's going to be a little bit more expensive. The car is a more proper race car, and there's a lot more expenses behind it. Those are the main drivers of the price on the FR car. But in Europe, the prices get quite a bit inflated. There's a lot more professionalism around all the teams. Just you can tell instantly by going through the paddock that F4 in Europe looks more like F1 than F4 in the US is a little bit more. It's a bit more casual, let's say, not as professional as what it is over there. They have a lot of teams, like Prima, for example, has got several crewed simulators in the shop. Each one of these is easily €1 million times 3. They got minimum €3 million worth of simulator
on the track for Formula 3
in the
drivers.
shop. Prima
For Formula 3
for
drivers.
all the
Formula
drivers.
2, Formula 3, and
Prima
they all Formula 2,
in
Formula
Van
1.
Amersfoort, Carlin. It's not uncommon to have a very high grade race professional simulator for European teams, and this is just trickled down from F1. F1, I'm not sure how many years ago it was, but F1 put restrictions on testing and how much where you could test and how much to try to bring costs down. This is 5, maybe 10 years ago. I'm not exactly sure.
No, like 3,
but
4
well, not the main. This is not the main cost cap that they just did. This was due to teams were spending way
around
10 years ago. Teams were spending crazy money. There's actually a story. There's an old McLaren mechanic called Elvis Priestley, and there's a story that he has when he was working at McLaren that they wanted to do wet weather testing, and so they actually no, the opposite. They didn't want to do wet weather testing. They wanted to dry the track off, and they actually hired in a helicopter, multiple helicopters to come into the track to dry the track off, because it's just like, we want to have we want to have dry weather testing. Let's bring in the helicopter and fuck the budget. Send it. But
pennies, let's do the helicopter.
Testing was especially people compare a lot Lewis Hamilton in his rookie career to we'll use an American, for example, Logan Sargent. Lewis Hamilton, before going into an F1 car, had dozens of days of testing in the McLaren F1 car before he had his debut on track. Not to mention that he had been primed by McLaren from karting day one. I mean, the relationship that Hamilton had with McLaren was basically a decade in the making, even before he came into the sport. But back then it was those guys were testing quite a lot, and now everything has shifted mainly to the simulator in F1, and on-track testing is extremely, extremely limited compared to what it was in 2007. So it's difficult Logan Sargent didn't really quite have, not really quite, he didn't have anywhere close to the rookie season that Lewis Hamilton had, but it's more difficult than ever for rookies to get up to speed in F1 than ever before. And I'm glad that they re-signed him again, because I do think he is a talented driver. I don't think, in my opinion, not quite as talented as Lewis Hamilton, just to be blunt. But let's see what he can do in his second year, because the amount of track time he's gotten in his first year could probably equate to how much testing Lewis Hamilton had before he even stepped foot in the race.
He has Formula 1 testing.
I'm not sure exactly what Verstappen had.
Yeah,
he came in a bit later, but Verstappen's another animal. He's almost inhuman to me, in my view. I mean,
he's the greatest.
I think he's the fastest driver that F1 has ever seen.
I agree.
He's the fastest driver F1's ever seen, and I think Lewis Hamilton is the best driver that that F1 has ever seen.
Yeah, I agree.
Best all-around driver.
Yeah, but Verstappen still has time.
Verstappen everyone knows, he had very big growing pains coming into the sport. He was very, very quick, but there were many things that, and it garnered him a lot of attention, a lot of fans, so that you could play either way and say that his aggressiveness and him crashing a few times when he should have been crashing was good or bad. There's a good argument for each side. But overall, to win a championship, it requires the best driver. And Verstappen is getting more mature, and he's getting better in all of the facets of being a driver. And he's definitely, Red Bull is at their peak right now, and he's at their peak, at his own peak right now as well. But Lewis Hamilton he makes smarter decisions. He's better with the media, in my opinion. He's just more experienced and wise than Verstappen is, and that makes him the best driver right now.
Do you think in the end of the career, Max Verstappen he'll become a better driver than Lewis Hamilton overall?
Only time will tell. Anything, drivers' egos are very fragile. If Verstappen, let's say in the next rule change, if Verstappen gets a car that's not quite up to him, it could break his ego and he could go downhill. Anything can happen.
Do you think if you put Hamilton and Verstappen on the same team, Hamilton will win?
I think that would be a very interesting thing to see.
Yeah, it's the best thing to see.
I would be able to give you an accurate opinion if I had worked with both drivers, whether before F1 or in F1, but I haven't. You can often see in the data, if you really know what you're looking for, what benefits the driver's bringing to the car and what part of it is the car. And even the people, you can see some of the data between car to car, but some of the granular stuff that you need to see to really be able to tell how good a driver is not 100% available to the teams. But there's no point in completely answering it because it's just not in the nature of F1. There's never a level playing field there's only level playing field between teammates. So there's 10 level playing fields within the within the grid. So, but it would be, everyone knows that would be the most interesting thing to see in F1, obviously.
For sure. It can't be even on the front, even in the back of the field, but it still will be the most interesting thing in Formula. Hamilton versus even in the slow team.
And we actually had I don't remember if we were at a restaurant or at the bar or we were talking and it was what would be really, really interesting is if there were two championships at the same time and they ran, on Friday they had one qualifying for the spec F1 series and maybe put them all in a Dallara Indy car or something, or a fast car, but it's spec, and make the same teams run it so that you have. It's difficult it'll complicate things. You have to change sponsors and teams and all this stuff.
Yeah, but we told
about. You have one qualifying and then a race in the spec car. Kind of just completely replace what the sprint
exactly.
What the sprint is, and just put it.
Sprint with this. Yeah, that's what we discussed.
Put qualifying. Make it. You have to have some sort of practice to get to speed with the car because it's two different things. So make it a 1 hour qualifying. That's a practice at the same time. Whoever does the best lap sets the grid for.
And then 30-minute race, and that's it.
30-minute race, and that would be interesting to see. It'd be good information for the teams to have as well to really.
Yeah, you can actually see. It will be the most interesting part.
The only downside people like the fans and the drivers and everyone might like the spec car a little bit better. That might happen. That's the main thing that might cause some difficulty and may not keep it from happening. But that's just we could all hope and and create scenarios. But there's so many politics and money and things involved that all have to line up to get some of this stuff to happen.
Same sometimes happens in boxing when you have two great champions, one have WBC belt, another have the WBO belt, but they have different promoters, different channels, and they can't make the ultimate fight that everybody want to see, So it's also sometimes happen in boxing. Same in racing, it's even harder.
Yeah.
And because we never know who is actually better driver. Hamilton or Verstappen.
And part of it, we want to have these conversations of is Lewis Hamilton better than Max Verstappen. Some of the mystery behind it is interesting,
that's
right?
what fans always discuss and argue.
Yeah, exactly. But the F1 regulations of recent years, like the grid is closer than it ever has been in F1 history.
Yeah, especially in 2021, it was an amazing season. I think.
The last 3 years have been the best three. I mean,
this year
Verstappen has completely destroyed everyone, and you could say, oh, now it's boring because there's not one winner, or there's only one winner. But everything besides Verstappen is incredibly fun to watch. Way more so than I think it ever has been.
Yeah. Like you always at the beginning of the season, Aston Martin was fast. Then like McLaren at the end of the season is fast. Like Ferrari sometimes fast, sometimes slow. Yeah, it's also always like. I agree. But
you get to Verstappen is dominating. It's not going to stay that way forever. I think.
Do you think next season?
It'll probably. Will be closer? Who knows? We'll see at the beginning of the season. The teams can make quite a bit of changes in the off season, and Mercedes is not giving up. Ferrari is not giving up. There's no teams out there that are just going to let Red Bull do whatever they want, and just Red Bull we'll fight for second. It's okay.
You are the Stroll, like not the junior, the father, and you can basically. You can build a team. Who would be in the team? Like who would be the engineer?
Oh, if I've got $1 billion to put into a racing team.
You have like $1 billion to invest.
Okay, if I had $1 billion to put in a racing team, well, the engine. I would start with hiring engineers first, just because I have a good appreciation for how important the engineers are in the grand scheme of things.
Do you know actually, by the way, like some stars like Lewis Hamilton in engineering in Formula One?
Well, everyone looks at Adrian Newey. He obviously has an extrally good track record.
He's an engineer, also because I thought he works with aerodynamics. It's also called engineer.
They're all whether you're working on the engine, the brakes, the mechanical side of the car, the kinematics of the car, or the aerodynamics, you're an engineer.
So he's chief engineer officer at Red Bull, or he's like.
He might. I'm not sure exactly his main title, but the titles don't matter. The titles are just something to call. But he's an aerodynamicist, yes, which does make him an engineer. But you have to anybody who's an aerodynamicist or someone who is involved in the vehicle dynamics of the car or whatever, you have to have an appreciation of the entire package. The reason Adrian Newey has risen so well, is because of his abilities in the aerodynamic space, and because the number one dominant thing in as far as your performance in an F1 car is aerodynamics by far. The kinematics of the car is it's not easy to figure out, but it's not as like voodoo, let's say. It's not voodoo magic as much as aerodynamics. Aerodynamics is a bit more complex and a more difficult problem to solve. Because there's a way to make the car aerodynamically fast, and there's a way to make the car kinematically fast, like mechanical grip versus aero grip, and you have to really keep all those things in mind. And the aerodynamics is going to overshadow the mechanical grip side of it in an F1 car. But what's been said about Adrian Newey is that he can see the air. And you can go to school and learn all of the aerodynamic principles and Bernoulli's principle and whatever you need to know, but there needs to be an element of art behind aerodynamics, in my opinion, and the art really comes from it's special to people. Artists, it's difficult to learn the art of engineering in the school. Where Adrian Newey, his ability to see the air, I think it's just an art. It's a way that his mind works that just works.
He's a genius,
he may or may not be a genius. He could have 100 IQ or 160, but whatever it is inside of his brain that allows him to see the air, that's an art. That's something.
Yeah, for me, that's the definition of genius, when you create something that never been created before, and when you can see the angles that nobody can see. It's not about IQ is bullshit. I think. Yeah. It's not about for me, no, I mean, yeah. So, and you're right. I mean, he can see the things and that other people just out of the box. It's amazing.
Well, it's interesting, yeah, because the clinic, like the psychology definition of genius is very tightly related to IQ, or like your ability to solve problems is really what IQ is, right?
Yeah, but I mean, it's very like it's like very limited problems in IQ tests, right? So it's like combinatorics and like basic math and stuff, so logic. So it's like very narrow. Narrow abilities of our brain, like it's not represent the whole thing.
Yeah, it's definitely not the whole picture.
So for me, that's why it's not like you can't judge the people with like my definition of smartness or genius or something like that. It's not related with the IQ, because actually sometimes it can be opposite, because people who think outside of the box, it's hard for them to have standard tests. You know,
I mean, thinking outside of the box is definitely, I would say, it's inversely actually correlated to IQ in that. Thinking outside, like very intelligent people have a difficult time seeing outside of the box. But I don't know. I guess I need to find it, because I know what you're saying. I would almost call it. You have to have a mixture of intelligence, like it's logical and intelligence and the artistic side of it to make the magic happen. And maybe the best word that comes to my mind right now, just in my opinion, is like visionary or like revolutionary or a
innovator.
Yeah, an innovator, something like that. You need to have the intelligence and the art.
By the way, have you read his book?
How to Build a Car?
Yeah.
How to Build a Car? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, nice. Is it a good book?
It's very good. The book basically goes through, and it's Adrian Newey explaining why he made the decisions he made in designing every car that he did. And in a way I kind of relate to it. Like what I do really well is I haven't designed an F1 car or anything like that yet, but what I do really well is seeing like a really big picture, and like a lot of engineers will only see like, okay, so for designing the front end of the car, the brake temp, or this is the best way to do this. But it's important to view not only the micro but the macro of it all. And in Adrian Newey's book, he really, in my opinion or my observation of it, he really focused a lot on the macro of the car. And like one of the first things that he talked about was when he was designing the Red Bull, when they first introduced KERS and where to put the battery and the electric motors and all that stuff. And where he ended up putting it was in the gearbox housing instead of where the other engineers had wanted to put it. And it's a very harsh environment to put something like that in because of the temperature and a lot of vibration, because it's very close to the engine. And they hadn't quite perfected the technology behind motors and stuff, so there was a big reliability concern around putting the electric motor in that area. But what worked really well for that is because of weight and keeping. The original thought was to put more of this towards the rear of the car, which would have made the rear of the car wider, which makes the rear wing less efficient. And it's also not good to put a lot of weight further away from the center of the car. You want to keep all of the weight as centrally located as possible. So it seems basic now, but it's seeing that, okay, it's really difficult to put it in here, but just seeing that in the big picture of things, we need to make it work. We need to make the reliability work so that we keep the aerodynamic profile in the rear the way that we need to, and also the weight distribution of the car as good as it possibly can be. And that's, by reading his book, that's where I see him excel the most, is just being able to see the big picture of the whole car, not only aerodynamically, but packaging, mechanically, kinematically. It all comes into play. We think of Adrian Newey as an aerodynamicist, but you have to know everything. To be the best, you have to know everything with the car. But Adrian Newey has been publicized the most. I'm sure there are engineers who are even more talented than him.
Oh wow!
That just haven't seen the light of day. They haven't made it into the media as much as he has, either because they just haven't had the success. Because a lot of things have to come into place. You can have the best engineer on the team, but the team, the mechanics aren't good. Or whatever, like there's so many pieces that have to come together as far as a team. Like, let's just keep it really simple and think of the engineer and the driver, which are the two most important parts of the team. Yeah,
everything has to come together, right? Like Verstappen, perfect storm. You have a father who Formula 1 driver, you have like money to do that, you also have a huge amount of talent. So everything comes together, and like then you have like extraordinary results. Same with that.
There's an element of skill involved in that. There's an element of luck,
yeah.
you know. And Adrian Newey started getting success around 25, 26 in IndyCar, and you know, like it very well. His entire life could have gone very differently if he didn't have, like, if he didn't. He was a very good engineer, obviously, at that point. But if he had gone into a team that wasn't up to par, or had a driver that was an idiot. A good engineer and an idiot driver, the engineer never gets recognized for it because you didn't win the championship. You could have the best performing car with two dumb drivers, and you know. And I'm sure what I'm saying is I'm sure there's some engineers out there who just didn't quite get either the momentum at the beginning, or the ducks didn't quite line up how Adrian's did. It's just interesting how things will go. Not to take anything away from him.
Yeah,
but,
sure.
There's an insane amount of talented engineers out there, but it's really important to know that I think, you know, your original question was if I was going to build a team.
Yeah.
You know, the two most important parts of any team are the engineers and the driver. You get that to work, and you have 80% of the equation figured out. The rest of it is, you know, obviously everything else has to go. There's a whole bunch of little things that add up to that last 20%. Reliability is probably the biggest one of that last.
It's also goes to engineers, right? Reliability.
Well, yes and no. As far as the design process, yes, but the mechanics play a huge part in the reliability of the car.
Wow. Interesting. Because they can
there are a lot of
the stuff when they put the car together.
No, not so much that, but mechanics see the car. Mechanics see the car going wrong. Engineers are often designing for performance. They have to design for reliability, but I find that the mechanics have a better brain for reliability design.
Actually,
there's an essence of being an engineer. Being a mechanic, they may not know how to calculate the fatigue limit of this certain part or whatever, but a mechanic will look at this part and say that's not going to work. It's going to break. It's going to fall apart. That's
amazing that you're like the coach, the driver, the engineer, and you can also be the mechanic, right? So you can.
I've worn many hats. Yeah.
And like, what can you actually like tell what are the responsibilities of each team member, like engineer, mechanic, driver, like who in ideal world, in the real world actually, like who responsible for what in like Formula 3 team or Formula 3 team, for example.
So 2, like we'll start from the bottom up. So the way I view a team is there's a list of priorities for the team to achieve. Like the most basic priority is that you show up for the event, and you know the trailer gets there, the car gets there. Right, so that's so obvious, but if the car doesn't get there, then it doesn't matter how fast it is. Right, so you know, basic priorities: car getting there, and then track time and reliability are another you know, fundamental priority for a race team. So starting with, you know, track time and reliability, I would say that mechanics are the most fundamental, important part of any racing team, because they are the ones that. If there's damage that happens to the car, or if something's not functioning properly, a good mechanic is going to get you out on track. And if you're not on track, it doesn't matter if your engineer is Adrian Newey or if your driver is Max Verstappen. It doesn't matter if an issue happens on the car and you can't fix it. So the mechanics play a huge role in reliability, and also just their skill in getting the car back up and going in the right way is huge. I'd say reliability then kind of bridges into the engineers. The engineers need in F1, like, so you said in F3, like in anywhere from like F4 to F2, like the car is not really being designed by the team. So the engineers are not really going to have a design. They're not going to have a design responsibility. They're going to be more responsible for the settings in the car, the setup. Which is a huge problem in itself, or a huge problem to solve in itself. It's not a little thing. But so in the world of F1, the engineers and the mechanics there's gonna be kind of a bridge between reliability, in my opinion, in that the mechanics need to have dialogue with the engineers in saying, you know, we can fix the car a lot faster if we design it like this, and you know, I look at that part. I think it's not going to work because if we get in here, you have to be able to fit your hand in here to fix it. That's where the mechanic is going to come into play. So there's a bridge there. But in F3, not as big of a deal. The next order of priority is that the driver is driving properly. I would say even before engineering becomes a priority on the car. If the driver, this is not so much of a problem in F1 because most of the drivers are there. All the drivers are there, not most, all of them. But in the junior series, there's a lot of learning that the driver still needs to do. You're not going to, in Formula 4, 99% of drivers don't come into that ready to drive the car. So making sure that the driver is driving properly is a priority before any setup work is done in the car, any engineering type stuff. So driver coaching, big priority. When the driver is driving properly, I would say when you get to about half a second to maybe 1.5 seconds off the pace of the fastest car in the field. In slower cars, like Miatas or F4 or something like that, this is going to be a lot closer to half a second. Whereas if you're like Formula 2 or IndyCar or F1, like if you're within 1.5 seconds, it's the driver becomes less of a factor the higher the performance that the car becomes. Is basically what I'm saying. So you can gain a second and a half in setup in a high performance car, whereas in F4 Miatas and stuff, the setup is not going to constitute for more than a second, I would say. That's just very general relative terms, right? Everything changes, right? But so once the driver gets into, let's just say 3/4 of a second, we'll split the difference there in an F4 car that you're aware of. This is when the job of the engineer starts to become more important. It's very easy to get a balanced car that works for the pace range within a second or so off. But when you start getting, I've said before, the last few tenths are the most valuable ones, the most difficult tenths to get.
For sure.
And it becomes vitally important for the engineer to know what he's doing, but also the driver to know how to speak to his engineer so that there's a team dynamic working together to get the performance of the driver as high as it can be and the performance of the car as high as it can be. And that's the role of the race engineer. The race engineer's job, in as few words as possible, is to make the most amount of performance from the driver and the car combination, right? So that's, as you can see, that's where I thrive the most is getting those two things together, because it's often a psychology thing as well.
It was amazing that you can see
I'm working. In every driver I work with, I'm working very adamantly and making sure you are where you need to be and where the car is where it needs to be. And linking those two things together is done by race engineer. They have
Brandon is going to launch a course about all of this aspect, so can't wait when you finish the course.
It's in the works. I've put so far about 1,500 hours into it. Probably even more than that, but the last I checked it was about 1,500, maybe 2,000 now. But we'll get into that a little bit later. But it's to win a championship, the race engineer and the driver are the two people that get you 80% of the way there. Those are the two most important things. The driver needs to be driving the car at 100%, and the race engineer needs to make sure that the driver is at 100%. It's always good to have, as a driver, it's really hard to see from the inside what you're doing wrong. So in my opinion, race engineers need to be driver coaches.
Yeah, for sure. Because I have a short experience when the racing engineer was just like 1 year, like before the season started, I have a test without Brandon, and it was like racing engineer, who only like racing engineer. And it's a huge day and night when the engineer can't coach you and advise you also, especially when you just start racing. Because I don't in my test I didn't feel the setups pretty well, didn't understand some aspects of mechanics and stuff, and even basics of driving, I had mistakes and stuff. And so for me as a beginner driver, I had to understand my mistakes, understand where is my mistake, where is the car lacking space, and give this feedback to engineer is almost impossible to do. And you
Yeah.
only, like with your feedback, sometimes you only get further and further from the optimal. So that's why it's so
Well, and
important when you can when you have engineer and coach combined. Yeah, that's 100%.
You'll probably remember a little bit too at the beginning that when we started working together, and it's common. Every driver goes through this phase, and that you're telling the engineer, oh, the car has oversteer going in the corner. Let's just say, I go into the corner, and the car it goes in there, and the rear comes around. I can't get Brandon, fix my car. It's not working.
I didn't say Brandon fix my car. But
well,
I just said like yeah.
I'm using you as an example that this happens all with every driver. It happens. Brandon, fix my car. It's oversteering. Can't drive it. And then what actually happens is I always look to make sure that you're driving first properly.
Yeah.
This, especially because you don't have 5 years of experience in a Formula car.
Yeah.
That's every engineer should go look at that first. Is the driver doing things properly?
Mm-hmm.
And most of the time we would look at this and say, okay, so what would happen if we drove this a bit differently? And I can kind of see just with experience that, okay, you're going into the corner way too hard when you've got all of the brakes on at the apex of the corner and the rear's coming around. That's not the case that's going to work. And first we talk about, okay, how does the driver affect the balance before the engineer does, right? And one of the big lessons that you had this year was getting off the brake at the right point and getting on it and using the throttle to stabilize the car through the middle of the corner. And without changing the car, without doing anything, there was a test of button wheel that we went from, the car's all over the place to now the car's understeering. Didn't change anything except for your driving. And the car was way more stable in the middle of the corner and on throughout.
Yeah, I also remember though, like when you asked me, I said, yeah, it's oversteer, and we saw the onboard, and you said like you have oversteer on the end of the corner, but that's because the reason is because you had understeer in the first part of the corner, something like that, and you had to fix that, and that's why you had oversteer. So yeah, my feedback it actually was opposite of that. So it wasn't oversteer, it was understeer in the beginning. But I remember I felt only and I remembered only the last part of the corner, the exit. That's why my feedback basically, if you didn't do the coach job, we will go to opposite direction.
If you have just an engineer, you're going to make an engineering change to fix it instead of a driver change.
So basically the best advice, if you don't have racing coach and they have engineer, then just don't change the setups. just try to.
What I would say is a good general rule of thumb. Let's just use 1 second. If you're more than 1 second off the pace, you have a lot. Most of your gain is going to come from as a driver. And I would even say this changes the further up in performance that the car gets. But especially in the lower levels like Formula 4, Miatas, etc. Slower cars doing less than 150 miles per hour top speed. The driver actually has more control of the balance than the engineer does. And 90% of drivers are going to be, let's say, experiencing oversteer or understeer, doesn't matter, will be experiencing an undesirable trait in the car, and they'll go to their engineer for them to solve the problem. Whereas at that level, you may be having an oversteer and understeer problem. It's very possible that you are. But an important lesson for you to learn at that point is how much control you actually have to fix it. Because the drivers who make it all the way up to the top, a really key trait that they have is adaptability to the car. Many drivers will have a successful season, and then they move to a different car, whether it's a step up or a step down.
Like Ricardo, right?
Ricardo is a different story. I think his was more of a mental story. But let's just say you move from Formula cars and you go race GT4 next season or something like that. A complete change in type of car, Formula car to a GT car. Let's say you won the championship in Formula 4, but then you go into GT racing and you can't get into the top 10. The best drivers in the world are adaptable. I would say Fernando Alonso is a really good example of this in F1, right? Everything the guy gets into is faster, right? That's not a trait of just being a good driver. That's number one trait that is evident with that is adaptability.
And how to train that,
exactly how we've trained. You need to understand. You need to understand that the car is always talking to you. When there's oversteer or there's understeer or whatever, the car is talking to you, and you can change your driving and affect how the car is performing. And that comes with having an appreciation of your car. You need to have some basic understanding of how the load is being transferred to the car, what your feet are doing, as far as load transfer is concerned, what your steering wheel does, how fast you're turning the steering wheel. You need to have an appreciation of your car and understand how that is affecting, basically the load on the tire. So everything is basically ends with what load is on the tire. So going from, let's say, my example, an F40 or GT4 car, the big differences are weight and inertia, right?
And aerodynamics, right?
Aerodynamics, right? What you'll see with aerodynamics is that a Formula car is going to be much more stiffly sprung than a GT car, and also with aerodynamics, you're going to be experiencing more G's in a higher speed corner than a lower speed corner. Like that's not the big thing, but I would say what's most difficult for drivers to adapt to moving from like a Formula car is weight. But weight and inertia basically are almost the same thing. Inertia is just how far away from the center the weight is, and especially like if you have an engine sitting up in front of you, that's a lot of weight sitting away from the center of gravity. It changes how you need to drive the car. But if you can just understand, how your brakes affect your brake and your throttle affect the balance of the car, how much the steering and the rate of steering affect the car, you can listen to what the car is saying and then adapt to it. And that's without having an engineering degree and understanding how inertia and all this stuff affects the dynamics of the car. It's a bit more complicated. Without having an engineering degree, that's the quickest way that you can get up to speed. In changing cars.
So basically, Verstappen and
you don't drive every car the same.
So
right?
Verstappen, you think it's probably obvious, but Verstappen very good at understanding the basics of engineering and mechanics as well, right? And he learned it in go-karting, or you think it's
I think
pure raw talent?
I think it's pure. What Verstappen has become very good at doing is being at the limit at all times and being very comfortable with the car right at the limit at all times. And right at the limit is where the car is screaming and yelling at you about what it wants and what it needs.
He understands, like, for example, when he drives GT car, do you think he adapts fast because he just
because he's capable of getting to the limit very quickly.
He knows the basics, like he actually knows the physics. Okay, now I feel that the car behaves like that, and in order to fix that, I know that I have to do like that. Okay, I'll do that. Or is
we would need to ask Verstappen exactly. I don't see a lot of drivers, and I don't want my drivers to be engineers because it's the amount of stuff that goes in engineering is enough to break my head, and I'm not even driving. It's going to break any driver's head if they try to be engineer.
But that's not the basics, of course.
At some point, like Verstappen is so capable and comfortable at being at the limit. At the limit is when the car is giving you the maximum amount of feedback. And he's had a lot of time, and he's got good coaching from. He may not understand it as far as engineering terms and some of the ways that I explain it, but he just you intuitively learn with enough time when you're so confident at getting to the limit like he has.
I agree,
Not a lot of people coach the drivers the way that I do, so I would tend to guess that he probably isn't thinking about the car in terms of mass inertia and stuff like that.
Can you basically quickly explain to people like oversteer, understeer? What is this?
So, as I've taught you, that oversteer and understeer is only evaluated at the center point of the corner. When you are in a steady state condition, that means you are not. Your speed is not accelerating, it's constant, not decelerating. And that is achieved with just a little bit of neutral throttle in the middle of the corner. And the balance of the car is basically when you're at the limit with that neutral throttle, what goes first? Does the front go first? That would be understeer. Does the rear go first? That would be oversteer. As you approach the limit or go over the limit, what goes first? That's what balance is.
Yeah, so basically when you guys turn the wheel and the car doesn't want to turn and it goes straight, it's understeer, and when you turn and the rear of the car goes from you, it's oversteer, right? So like
yes, that's the simplified version. But for more of the drivers who have a bit more experience in the car, experience driving, you can only assess balance in the middle of the corner in a steady state condition. It's very important to distinguish this, and I'll elaborate a little bit more on why that is, because it is possible for you to have a moment where the rear is coming around with you on entry or an exit, et cetera, et cetera. But as far as balance is concerned, balance is only at the center of the corner in a steady state. When you are in the entry of the corner or in the exit of the corner, you have a lot more control over what the car is doing. And oversteer, understeer scenarios at the beginning of the exit of the corner, this is where the driver really comes into play in balancing these things. Like there's some things that we can do in engineering. There's actually a lot of things you can do engineering-wise we call it the transient phase of the car. Transient meaning when things are changing. But what I've coached you a lot on is, like if we're having oversteer on the entry of the corner, it's often that we've got a little bit too much brake into it, trail brake into it, right? If we come off the brakes a little bit, we can solve some of that oversteer in the entry of the corner and have a bit more balance. You have control over the car on the entry of the corner and the exit of the corner. That's the definition of control. You can do something about it. The exit of the corner is the same thing. The most common issue on the exit of the corner is that understeer. And understeer is because we've gotten on the throttle too early, right? You have control of the car. When the car is steady state in the middle of the corner, technically you actually have no control at all. And there's a quote by Sterling Moss and saying that there's a feeling in the car that you get when you're at the limit, and that you're on a predestined trajectory, right? I don't know if you've heard this before, maybe not, but we call it predestined trajectory, right? And predestined trajectory, if you're really on the limit right in the middle of the corner, the car's balanced, you'll see that the steering and what you do with it doesn't really have much of an effect on the car. You don't have much control at that point, in that phase of the corner. And that's where balance all is. So what the driver, where a good driver and a bad driver are separated, are not usually in the middle of the corner. Like there are times where like mid-corner speed is not quite the same driver to driver, but usually when mid-corner speed is lower in one driver, it's because of something that he did on the entry of the corner. Whether he didn't rotate the car enough, whatever. There could be 100 different possibilities that happen. But if there was a track that was just driving around in a perfect circle and you never stopped turning, it's just absolutely perfect, and you just held the steering wheel angle like this the whole time, I'm convinced. NASCAR is very. There is still an entry to the corner and an exit to the corner in a NASCAR track, right? And there's a lot of talent in NASCAR drivers in it. But in the same way, in a NASCAR track, all of the talent comes from what the driver, like a talented driver versus a non-talented driver, comes from what they do on the entry of the corner and on the exit of the corner, and how they get the car rotated and how they get the car to the peak amount of grip in the middle of the corner. If the track was a perfect circle, aka there was no entry or no exit to any of those corners, I'm convinced that the entire field would be within a few tenths of a second if the setup and cars and everything all equal. It's actually quite easy to be on the limit laterally right in the middle of the corner, but it just only happens for a split second. Most of the corner is the entry. 90% of the corner is the entry and the exit, right? So if you as a driver can figure out where that midpoint of the corner is and optimizing for that, and everything that you need to do in the entry to optimize for that mid corner, that's your mid corner speed that carries you out on the straightaway. But that's where you get control, and that's where the driver has a huge amount of control over whether the car oversteers, aka the rear steps out, or understeers, right? So like I said, so we're talking about in the center of the corner is balance. Everything before that, it's not really technically the balance of the car. If you're having more oversteer, let's say, on the entry of the corner than you would like, I would call this more of a stability issue than it is I wouldn't call it. It's just mathematically, with vehicle dynamics knowledge I have in my head, that is a stability issue, meaning that when you turn the car, it starts to yaw more than you want it to. Stability, an overstable car, when it wants to yaw, it wants to correct itself and go back straight. So there's too stable at the entry of the corner, and then there's not enough stability in the entry. Instability and overstability, right?
Yeah, just so.
As far as what you're seeing, if you're going into the corner and you're going like this, it's an oversteer. But and I go into this quite a lot in the course. It's too much to explain here.
We'll
go on for a little bit too much.
Now,
but,
if you guys want to become racing drivers, that conversation that if you have a good engineer and coach, you will always have, and it's amazing. I like that. We talked to Brandon like this a lot in between races, in between sessions. Like it was amazing.
Stability and balance will feel like the same thing, but they're two completely different things. And you have a lot of control over the stability in the entry, the quarter, exit the quarter. But
yeah, I feel that I still like, for me, it's I'm not even close to like good beginner level in terms of like understanding and feeling and interpreting like what car is doing to into the feedback.
But you're in our season together, we didn't work much on engineering. I made sure that the car was balanced mid-corner because that's what's going to give you the most confidence as a driver. You don't want any understeer, oversteer. But because I still rate you at probably about a second off of like a really good driver. And we're not, there's still just a few things that I want to have a good foundation as far as your driving. And I sprinkle in some of these things so that you start to understand how the car works and everything, because this is ammunition that you can use to improve your driving. If you understand, at this point, we're at the very base level of your understanding of the car.
Yeah, because I still have to gain this second from like my driving,
but
without understanding like and then you can start digging into the details.
It would be very easy for me to break your brain. And I mean, maybe some of the test days I broke your brain a little bit. You have to break it a little bit
to grow,
to learn, right? But I'm very tactical about breaking it just a little bit and not overwhelming it. Because as soon as you get overwhelmed and you're thinking about stability and in terms of balance and all this stuff too quickly, you're going to go backwards.
In terms of foundation, what do you think is like where am I lacking the most still in terms of foundation? You said like foundation is still lacking a second, right? Or you mean overall a second? Or
well, so if we're talking just about lap times, I think you've learned quite well how to master the center of the corner and get to the limit there, but just entry and exit, it's too inconsistent. Sometimes you are right there as good a driver as you can be on the entry or on the exit of the corners, and sometimes you're just not.
On average, second.
On average, it's a second. So like, it's very difficult to get to the limit of the car.
So consistency is what I'm lacking the most.
Yes, and it's because it's very difficult to be consistent when you're right on the limit. Like you just, it comes with experience and doing it over and over and over. It's repetition that gets you.
Yeah, like we when we broke it down in the middle of the season, I remember we came to the conclusion that it's and it's like shame on me. It's a physical aspect, because I wasn't in the worst shape of my life.
But like ultimate lap time, you're very good. If you put one lap together, you would be on pole. But it's very like, I see it happen perfectly in one corner one time, and then the next lap it's not good in that corner, but it's good on this corner.
Yeah, on pole.
It's
Brandon,
like, so you know how to do it.
Brandon on pole, and they are very competitive, like top series and stuff.
So you have all of the seeds there to put together really good lap time. So like your foundation as far as driving technique is there and it's good. We need to add repetition to that so that it becomes second nature. You can't be thinking about how to do it.
And I think I can't repeat it consistently, because I'm become tired very fast. My focuses go away and all that, and that's because also because of it was like our inside.
The physical thing can cause you to become inconsistent very quickly. And what I've, in some research I've done post-season, I've done a lot of research into the physiology of like when there's actually a good study that they did on for the US military on heart rate versus your ability to make like cognitive decisions and focus and all that stuff. It's just a direct. What they found is that
the lower it is, the better it is, right?
Well, yeah. So what they found is that like about 130 BPM is where it starts to taper off, and you lose the ability to make your cognitive function goes down. So that's focus, that is reaction time, your ability to make decisions like quickly without thinking. It starts to taper off at about 130 BPM. And it's not too bad, like to get to 150, 160, there's not a big drop off. The big drop off happens somewhere around 170 to 180. And what they found in the cognitive tests given to these soldiers is that in that range, that cognitive ability basically halves. Right around 170, 180, it just falls off a cliff. You can't form coherent sentences, or some of the things that were noted that something was happening and the reaction time was delayed by 3 times. It's quite a big drop off. I'm sure that when you're tired and when you notice that you are not, that your brain's not working 100%, like everyone has probably been to the point where they're physically exerting themselves quite a lot, and you notice that the cognitive function goes down.
Sure.
They found that when you notice it's happening, it's about like 190. So your cognitive function halves before you even notice. And then very quickly after that, so you've already halved cognitive function, and then a little bit after that is when you notice, my brain's not working anymore. So between 130 and 170, you're declining as far as cognitive function goes. So it's different. Like 130 is not a very high. I mean, it's in the aerobic range, but it's not. Most athletes are performing above 130. But because racing is such a cognitively demanding sport, it's very important, I would say, with the knowledge that I have now, for a driver to wear a heart rate monitor and to track what's happening out there on track, because you won't notice that you are losing cognitive function.
That's why, a lot of Formula drivers, a lot of people think, it's so easy to drive the car.
It needs to be. It's a requirement for it to be easy to drive the car. If you are at all physically exerted, and tired while out there driving, you are leaving time on the table.
And that's why all Formula 1 drivers and Formula drivers, they elite athletes, not Formula 1 drivers, because the amount of G-forces and stuff that you have, and the concentration that it requires from your brain, it's so intense that you lose 4 kilograms of weight in 12-hour race, and when you put 2 liters of liquid during the race,
it's like running a marathon.
So it's basically so the all elite level of athletes in terms of physicality, right? And that's also it explains what you said that, because you want to have low heart rate, you have to be you don't want to think about your physical limits when you're in the car. You just want to focus purely on driving. And when you have heated engine behind you and everything is happening so fast, and when you have G-forces, the amount
of sensory information that you need that your brain needs to take in and then record. You have to remember what the car is doing. You have to remember it, record it. Car spins out, you need to maneuver very quickly. The cognitive demand is significantly high, and anything above 130, if your heart rate is above, it can go above it. Sometimes what happens, if there's a short period of a lot of stress, your heart rate can peak. We're not talking about that. We're talking about sustained heart rate about 130. That is the number that you need to aim for. And I guarantee if you feel at all physically exerted, you're probably 150 to probably more. You're probably more like 170. If you're tired out there, you're 170.
When I did box, last time my pulse was more than 200. So it's insane. And when I just walk, my pulse is 87, 90. I just walk it. I don't even run. So I definitely have things to work on. Cool. Let's come back. Short answers and short questions, short answers. Come back to your dream team. So who would be in your dream team? Adrian Newey as an engineer. Who would be the drivers?
I don't know enough engineers. Adrian Newey would definitely be a good one to pick. I think Ross Braun. I like his approach to politics a bit more. I have read his book.
Also nice.
So I think Ross Braun is an overall better pick.
As an engineer or team principal?
Just because he started as engineering, but he has really good political mind as well, which is good to have. Why not have a little bit more skills in there if you can keep the engineering side up? Those are 2 guys that I know of that are really good, but I'm sure there are engineers that are more talented than they are that just they don't have any books.
Let's go for Ross Braun and Newey, right?
Either one, yeah.
And who would be the team principal?
Who would be the team principal? I like Gunther.
Because he's straightforward.
I like that he's straightforward. I think that my personality would mesh most with Gunther Steiner's personality, which I think maybe if he's not, they're all good team principals, but if he's not one of the best team principals, it's good to have, you know, the team aspect. If the team's all meshing together, if you have multiple people working together at once, it's better than just having one genius on the team, right? So I would choose that just because I'm pretty sure I'd work really good with Gunther. Just because I'm, as you know, I'm very straightforward. And, you know,
yeah, that's amazing. That's
when you're fucking up, you know that you're fucking up.
That's the best part. I like it so much. Because, you know, for me, I think it's not typical for American culture, at least from my experience. Because, and it's also like part of this also good because people like nice to you, but you never know what actually. Sometimes you don't know like what people actually think, and they can like, you know, you can spend a lot of time wasting a lot of time getting to the real answers. And what I like about you that was straightforward, like was that you like you like no BS. Like if it's rough but the truth, you're like okay. Dimitri,
it's come to bite me sometimes. Some drivers, their egos are too fragile and they can't handle being told that they, you know, look at this corner, you're not doing it right.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. And, you know, Brandon's too mean to me. It's happened, but
yeah. And last but not least, drivers. Who would be your two drivers?
I really like Lando. I think Lando is good because he's very personable with the media. I think even better, like Ricardo's up there as far as like fan favorite people. But I think Lando, he seems to have a pretty good mindset to me. Like he doesn't get quite shaken when things are going bad, which I look at a lot. Ricardo, when things are not going his way, I think that's a big reason why he left Red Bull. I think he messed himself up in the head a little bit, being with a teammate that he couldn't.
Yeah, he understood that Verstappen is like the number one driver, and he didn't want to be the like number two driver, I guess, and that's the reason, right?
I think that's just the textbook definition of your ego getting broken a bit. Drivers with not a big ego, I think Lando would
stay and
work with. If Lando was with Verstappen, I think that's an even more interesting driver combination. I'm going to choose Verstappen as my second driver. I think that's an even more interesting driver combination than Hamilton and Verstappen. Hamilton and Verstappen would be better for the media. People will eat that up. It's not as interesting. But Lando and Verstappen, I think, are two drivers that are polar opposites, yet very quick, both of them. So as far as mindset, two people being polar opposite, I think creates an interesting dynamic. Because
and they also race together and like virtual racing and they like bodies and stuff.
Yeah,
it also can quickly disappear, as we know. Rosberg and
rivalries can, you know, but who knows what would even happen? Rivalries can happen very quickly, and friends lost.
But that's a cool combo. Actually, Verstappen, when he was asked this question, he also like said Lando Norris and Fernando Alonso. What was his answer?
Alonso needs to let some of the young guys come up. So I would say go drive the car. Go have fun, Alonso. You've had your time. Even though I think he's a great driver. But
what's your like next question? What's your top? Let's do the top 5 all-time drivers. Like, what do you think? Who you admire the most?
Schumacher is there. Schumacher was
number 5 or number. Like let's do 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. That's too many. We're gonna do top 3 because I'm gonna think too long if we have to do 5. So top 3.
Okay, top 3. That's for the shorts. Top 3 best drivers of all time.
I would put Verstappen as number 3.
Oh wow.
Like I said, I think he's the fastest driver that there's ever been, but Verstappen has some rough edges that he's been ironing out, and I think over time he could make it to my number 1 spot. But right now I think he's number 3. I think Hamilton is number 2. And I think Schumacher is the best driver that's been in F1.
Wow, that's awesome.
And I would say Schumacher because before Schumacher was in Ferrari, Ferrari was struggling quite a bit in the first year with Schumacher. And he it's actually in Ross Brawn's book. I've seen a little bit of what Schumacher, what his contribution to the team was, and there was a lot of work that Schumacher did on the engineering side to understand the car, to understand how he can give feedback to his engineers and work with his mechanics. He's very personable with his mechanics and their names. So there's a lot that I see that makes Schumacher the most well-rounded driver. I think if you put Schumacher and Verstappen together, Verstappen's going to kick his ass and win every race. But Schumacher was able to take a team that was not functional and winning, and he was a main part in taking that team
brought together
and bringing it into a dominant team. Whereas Verstappen, in my opinion, has not done that. Red Bull is not the fastest car because of Verstappen is not an important part. Well, he is an important part, but he's not an integral part of why that car is extremely fast, just from the outside looking in. There might be some books written 10 years from now that prove me wrong. I haven't seen it, but Schumacher's contribution to Ferrari was more than I could see in
and he changed the game, right? Because like after him, people start doing fitness a lot.
Yeah,
and he like also like the feedback with the engineers and mechanics. Also like it's become a normal thing when people actually collaborate a lot with engineers because he introduced it. Right?
He was a leader in that team, and
What about Niki Lauda? He also like seems to be the leader on the team, no?
Not as a driver, but as a driver. Once a driver, always a driver. But
I mean, like he also like speak a lot with engineers. No, not the same like Schumacher. Right?
I don't know every single driver's story, and Niki Lauda's story is one that I'm not as familiar with as Schumacher's. He may have been an even better integral part than that.
Actually,
not every driver, especially the ones from before I was even born.
And like from Senna, it might be the Senna also like. Can you guys like text us in the comments, because I also maybe it was a Senna who firstly like changed the game in terms of physical aspects, because I remember the documentary when he's like running on the beach and stuff, and it was like saying that before him drivers like didn't do a lot of fitness like he
Senna was actually there. I've heard some stories. He was very much a part of the design of the car as well. And it's hard to pick just three. There's so many good drivers that have been in there. I leave Senna off my list, but they're all up there. It's so hard to do.
I agree.
There's 10 drivers that easily can be number one.
And now like the last like racing question. Also, if you can give us also if you can give a short on last racing question, like if you can say like let's say somebody want to race, right? And what would be like the milestones in terms of the budget and like what's the best roadmap? Not the best, like the optimal roadmap to Formula One.
Somebody coming from no experience.
Like in terms of like year 1, year 2, 3, 4, 5, and like year, category, and budget. Like year, category, budget. Can you like roughly do the picture?
Gotcha. Well, you have to start with the end in mind in any of this stuff. A lot of people, their end goal is F1, which I think is very difficult for that to be true, but for that to happen, but there's no reason why you shouldn't make, your goal should be the biggest goal that you can think of. If your goal is F4, to be F4 champion and that's it, you're not going to become as good of a driver as if F1 is your goal. So we'll use that as context. Goal is F1. Where do you start? So you have to get the experience in the open wheel cars. So the most difficult cars to drive, and I think they're the cars that are going to reward proper driving more than any other car. So we start with open wheelers. The quickest, most cost-effective way to prepare yourself for open wheelers is in karts. It's still the cheapest form of motorsport, even though we talked at the beginning of this episode how that can still be quite a salary you need to.
Let's do the bare minimum. What you have to get a Formula One. So let's calculate not 250 for the go karts, but like let's say 100K for a season.
Well, the path to Formula One is minimum $8 million. So let's just start there. All right, you need to spend at least 3 years in go karts, minimum. I've never seen anybody go from knowing nothing about racing to winning races and understanding the car and how to go fast in less than 3 years. Sure, it's possible, but let's just say 3 years. 3 years in karting, you're almost at the first year. It's going to be cheaper the slower you are, because you don't have to put as much money in the national events and everything. So but in 3 years you may have spent $500,000 in 3 years, maybe a little bit more than that. But you need minimum of 3 years in karts preferably more, especially if you're starting younger. Spend as many years as you can in karts and get the basics done, because that's the cheapest way to get the basics done. Once you get into open wheel cars, things get more expensive, and you need to move up the ladder as quickly as you possibly can to make things cost effective, and just as well when you get into the limelight.
Right? You said,
what's that?
You said
you need to move up as fast as you possibly can. Once you get into open wheel cars, that's usually the first step is Formula 4. Or in the US, you can also get into USF stuff, the USF Juniors, USF 2000. One of those junior formula categories, that's going to be your first step, and you have to get into that and move up the ladder as quickly as you possibly can. I would recommend starting with a lot of testing at the very beginning. I've heard of the recent drivers that went through, Lando Norris is one of the most recent drivers to make it into F1. I heard that before he did a single event in F4 that he had done about 40 or 50 test days. That could be true, it may not be true, that's just words down the grapevine. I wasn't there. Take it with a grain of salt. But I still would recommend, just because as far as open wheelers go, it's still the cheapest level is going to be in F4. Do all of your testing there so that you get the basics and fundamentals down early, and then once you're in the races, you're ready to go, and you can shoot up the ladder as fast as you possibly can. The drivers who shoot up as fast as they possibly can, just like a stock or whatever, a stock is going up and it's doubling in price every quarter. This is going to be the stock that people are going to be excited about, are the ones that are going like this, not the ones that are slowly going up. So when you get into the limelight, you need to be moving up quickly. So start with testing. When you're ready and you have a good fundamentals dialed in driving the car, it's time to do your season of F4. Season of F4 in the US, like I say, is $250,000. In Europe, that could be $500,000. I think start where it's a bit cheaper. I think the US is a bit of a better option, even though the prestige and the level of competition is a bit better in Europe than it is here. You still are at the beginning. I say do a cheap year and then go year 2 to go into Europe and test what your skills are there. Once you're done with Formula 4, it needs to be 1 year per category until you get to F1, in my opinion. Verstappen went karting, Formula 3, and then F1. That's like the fastest.
To summarize, go 1 year, 3 years go karting, 3,000.
Yeah.
Then
testing and two seasons of F4 is going to get pretty close to $1 million. Maybe a little bit less, maybe a little bit more. Formula 3 in the US, 300,000, 400,000. In Europe, FIA F3 can easily be €1 million. Maybe a little bit less, maybe a little bit more. Formula 2 is getting into the 1.5 to 3 million euro, depending on how much money you want to put into it. And I recommend that you put as much money as you possibly can put into it, because it's going to increase the speed that you can get up the ladder, which in turn increases your stock value, or not your stock value, but the excitement that the general public has about your stock. And you spend 1 year in F3, 1 year in F2, and then try to get an F1 at the end of that deal. That's the cheapest way to get up there.
Nice.
There are some drivers that have done 2 or 3 years in F2. If you do need to spend, a couple more years in something and stay there in F2 because you're there around F1, meeting people, making connections. F2 is really where you need to perform to get into F1. So if you spend 3 seasons in F3, I don't think it's as good as spending 3 seasons in F2. But it is going to be more expensive. But that's why you want to get the fundamentals down in the cheap car, get it done in the F4. Spend as much time as possible testing. I think it's totally fine to spend half a year or a full year testing, if that's what you need to get to that point. Testing will be cheaper than the races, and it's going to be more value for dollar.
Yeah. Cool. Sounds great. Thank you so much. And the last question, I forgot to ask you in the beginning, who brought you into the racing? Your father or? It
was actually my mom. My mom started becoming a NASCAR fan.
Nice.
And so I mentioned that I got into karting when I was 7.
Yes.
And it was just, I see NASCAR racing on TV. Mom, I want to be a race car driver. And you go take a lesson in the go-kart. And I'm this tall, and I'm driving around like this and spinning out and crashing all the
She
time.
told you go and check.
It was for my birthday. They bought me a go-kart lesson at a track called Adams in California. Yeah, in Riverside.
That's awesome.
Close to LA, Southern California.
Yeah, the same with me actually. Like, I will share this in common because like when I was 15, and I said like, wow, like I saw the brochure like that. Oh, this racing school in St. Petersburg. Like, not racing school. It's like how to drive car in extreme conditions and snow and stuff. And like, oh, and they like accept from 14 years old. And I was like, oh, wow, mom, can we try that? And I said, yeah, sure, let's do it. And it was like how I get into racing actually. Not racing, but
the sport's a hell of a drug, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. And then you like, once
very addictive.
Yeah, when you start your racing career, you're like, okay, I still I know a lot about racing, so I wanna still be in racing business. But from the other side, that was a logic, or because you like engineering, or what was
budget was the initial thing that set me off to go into the engineering route. So I went and got my engineering degree.
But you could completely go from racing to like another journey. Why you stick to the engineering and racing?
Well, I stick with the engineering side because I'm very good at math and solving problems and all. So it just it's well suited for the person that I am. And I'd like to, merge the engineering and the driver coaching side of things. I have the experience as a driver. I have empathy for what drivers go through, both psychologically and physically. What it takes to drive a car. I actually done quite a few test days in the F4. Yeah. Is that the door? It's the alarm. It's we're about to get swatted. But I'll take a couple steps back. I'm well suited to the engineering side of things. Just my brain, I'm smart. I do well in math. So that made me go towards the engineering side. I have the empathy for driver coaching. I've been a driver. I've gone through that whole thing, so I understand the physical and the psychological side of racing. And I've actually found that since leaving the driving side of it, I've actually enjoyed more coaching drivers, and like the wins that I've gotten as a coach and an engineer have been just as exhilarating, if not more exhilarating, than the wins that I got as a driver myself.
So yeah, the last question is, what's your ultimate goal? What do you want to achieve, and what's your next big direction that you want to go?
Well, the big thing, I've been driver coaching engineering in the junior formulas for about 4 years now, and the main thing that I notice is that there just isn't enough time for me to coach all of the drivers everything that they really need to know to get to the level that they want to. The way that things go at the track typically is, driver goes out on track, driver comes back in, I look at the video, and I will look and find whatever the lowest hanging fruit is at that given point that's going to give you the most return. And what happens with this is that there needs to be a foundation that's built, and the time that we have to actually do learning, most of the time needs to be spent with you out on track. We all agree with that. Once we're at the track, we need to be on track, not in the pits doing lessons, not working out, not doing. It's not school time. It's very difficult to have school time at the track, and from what I find is that we're looking for the lowest hanging fruit in each session, and that kind of tends to okay, so this is what it is here. Let's fix that. Okay, that's what that is here. Fix that. And we're kind of there's 100 different things that need to come together, and this is the lowest one. We pick that, and now we pick this one. We're kind of just barely putting together a puzzle, one piece at a time, and we might be able to fit 2 pieces of the puzzle in over the course of a weekend, of a 100-piece or whatever piece puzzle. So my next thing that I've put together is something called the Champions Formula, and like I said, there's a puzzle of about 100 pieces just to get the maximum lap time behind it. But I said before that my favorite driver is Michael Schumacher, and because I feel like he's the most well-rounded driver. And I think for a driver to become a champion, it's not just about
Speed.
fast lap times.
Mm-hmm.
It's often about how you work with your engineer, how the empathy that you have for your car. It's about your mindset. Mindset's a huge part of it. Everyone agree with that. Your racecraft, the decisions that you make out on track. Whether do I pass this guy? Do I not pass this guy? How do I find clean track during a qualifying session? That all goes into your racecraft. Being a leader on your team is an important thing. That's probably the most overlooked thing that I see. A lot of drivers just come in and is like work on my car and that's it. But Michael Schumacher was one that he knew the names of everyone on his team. He knew that that Fred was having a baby that weekend. And things like that is what kind of constitutes into being a leader. And if you can get the most out of your people, I've heard mechanics
overall
for life in general. If you want to get the most out of your people, you need to be a good leader. And I've heard mechanics saying like, I'm going to call him Jeff, Jeff the driver. Jeff comes in and he doesn't say a fucking word to me until, he gets in the car, he gets out, says nothing. He's like, I don't care. I'll leave a bolt loose on his car. It won't faze me at all. I don't like the kid at all. Whatever. I'm not going to put any extra effort into working on this kid's car. I've literally heard mechanics come and say to me, like, I don't think that's personally, I don't think that's not how I would do it. Like, I'm going to give 100% no matter what. But you can't control the principles and the mindset of your team. But what is for sure is that if you're a leader and your team feels appreciated by you, you're going to get the most out of them, which is, I guarantee you're going to affect your results on track because you're going to put in the extra mile, the extra step that it takes to help you meet your goals, which is winning races, right? So I've been putting together a program. There's a couple of things involved in it like that, but especially some of these lessons, you just can't go through them at the track. There's not enough time to do these things, and it's something that I feel that drivers need to develop a training program around off the track and develop not only fast lap times, but their mindset and racecraft and leadership and marketability, getting money. So that's what the Champions Formula is. It's a 10 elements that create the most well-rounded driver, and all these things can come together to create champions. So it's not only fast lap times that get you there.
Good luck with that, and we talked about this a lot, and I think it's super cool. And I wish you all the best with this project, and let me know if I can help further also with this stuff.
You're gonna be in the founding fathers of students for sure. So
okay, man. Thanks a lot for coming, for your time. It was awesome, and thank you for the awesome season in Formula 4 this time. It's a pleasure. It's a blessing to have you as my first engineer in my racing career. I think it couldn't be better. So thank you so much.
And you've done a really good job first year. So
thank you so much.
One of the best students so far.
Thanks. That's awesome. Okay, bye guys. Subscribe to the channel and leave the comments and questions. Thank you so much for watching.
We'll see you in the next one.
Yep.